Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you, Asim Waqif. Maybe a few words to introduce you a little bit more. You were born in 1978 in Hyderabad, sorry for my pronunciation, in India. As you said, you were trained as an architect in the School of Architecture and Planning in New Delhi, and you also worked as art director for film and television for a while, before you turned to an independent artistic practice that is a crossover between art, design, architecture, and public space. You address particularly ecological, social, anthropological questions. We will talk about it later. I will also speak about the biennale and triennales you took part in the last years. You mentioned the exhibition in the Palais de Tokyo in 2012, one of your first big show in Europe, and I love the title, so I'm gonna say it. It was called Bordel Monstre. You also took part in the Biennale in Chicago. You made also an installation in the Hayward Gallery in London in the recent year, in an exhibition in Pittsburgh, and also in the Islamic Biennale in Jeddah last year. So I would suggest for today to follow a line. So I don't know how this is working. Just press. Oh, sorry. I probably did something wrong. Maybe if anyone can help.
Let me just press again, forward.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's okay. So the topic of the day, the habitat to inhabit, can relate to different scales and to different culture. We can inhabit a room, a private space. We can inhabit a house. We can inhabit a neighborhood, a city, and finally, you can inhabit the earth. So I would suggest to navigate through these different scales through our conversation and through your work. So maybe first one would be home. In 2006, the French architect Patrick Bouchin curated the French pavilion of the Architecture Biennale in Venice. He decided to entrust a collective or architects, Exit, with the task to transform the classical pavilion, French pavilion, into a house that they call the Meta Villa. It was a home where you could cook, where you could sleep, where you could stay, rest, work, or whatever. People would live in the Meta Villa, they would shop in the Venetian store nearby, they would have their bread delivered every morning from the neighborhood, they would invite some guests. It really functioned like a house. So I would say maybe one important statement is that making oneself home is also letting people in, making people be part of it. And that's a very important dimension of your work, to let the public in, to let the worker or the institution become part of the project. It's participative. Can you talk us a little bit more about this method of yours?
Actually, institutions are very reluctant to become part of my project. I have to kind of force it onto them. Institutions like to create systems to have very efficient flow, but I feel sometimes the efficiency is lost and the system becomes more important. So for me, it's been important to challenge these kind of systems. Also, the hierarchy in terms of a work team, where there is this artist or creative person on top, and then the people below are mostly expected to follow instructions. I like to create a situation where I create a very conducive environment for those people with their skills, the right material, the right tools, and let the process of fabrication flow so that we together arrive at something. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think also they make the project their own. But
yeah.
It's quite it must be a constraint, no, in your work to let it like open to the...
No, actually, I think it's less responsibility for me if other people are also taking creative decision, frankly. So, and actually the really interesting thing that happens is that the people who are working on the project feel a sense of ownership over what is being created. And if they are in a comfortable space, in many ways, actually, for example, I think in the fabrication industry all over, there is a lot of anxiety about whether one will be paid, when one will be paid, whether the working situation will be nice, whether the food there will be nice. So I've tried to take out those anxieties from the work process. I pay people before they ask, and then I ask them for a bill. And also I try to pay them more than they're expecting from me, and provide a really good, comfortable workspace with uh, relevant tools, relevant materials. And then when they are also given the opportunity to take creative decisions, um, quite often they are very reluctant at the beginning. They don't want to take creative decisions. They think it's my job to take all the creative decisions. But once a good trusting relationship is formed between the team members, and they start taking these creative decisions, then they feel that the work also belongs to them. And then the kind of input they give into the project is much more from their heart, maybe.
Yes, I want to work with you now. So one important dimension of your work is the materiality, the material, and especially the handcrafted material, the bamboo that evoke vernacular construction in India. You made many different installations in bamboo. I can show a few. What does it mean for you, bamboo?
Uh, Bamboo is actually a very happy accident in my artistic career. Actually, initially when I started working, even while I was an architecture student in Delhi, bamboo was a very cheap, affordable, and also very flexible material in terms of what could be done with it. So that's why I was using it, and also because I had been doing rock climbing, so I was pretty comfortable with knots and tying. And so when I did propose my first art project, I thought that is a material I'm comfortable with, and I did that. And then a couple of more projects with bamboo. And then everybody started calling me a bamboo artist, and I was like, I don't want to work with bamboo ever. So I stopped working with bamboo for many, many years. But in 2019, I got a project where bamboo was a very good fit, both in terms of context, the skill available in that area. And so I went back to bamboo, and then now again everybody's calling me a bamboo artist, which I don't like so much. But I have been working not only with the bamboo as a harvested material, but also plantation, how to harvest, how to season, looking at seasoning from a vernacular perspective before we started pushing any chemicals and poison into timber and bamboo. There were very interesting methods from different parts of the world, but also South Asia has some very good methods. But also looking at more modern techniques of how bamboo can be seasoned.
And you told me that today bamboo construction, and especially inspired by vernacular architecture, is no more possible because of
Yeah,
regulation.
partly it's got to do with the idea of modernity and development. India being underdeveloped country, so-called underdeveloped country, and not only institutions like World Bank, but the government of India as well. The aspiration is to move towards more durable industrial materials. So that is one aspect, which is pushing people away from vernacular architecture. But the other is actually policy as well as regulation. So, for example, when you look at earthquake regulations in India, they have studied only cement, concrete and steel structures for earthquake resilience. They never studied the vernacular architecture for earthquake resilience. So vernacular is not earthquake resistant. Similarly, right now we have a rural housing scheme which is providing a huge grant to local people in villages to construct their own houses, but only cement brick houses with tin roofs, that kind of a typology is allowed. So that in the last 10 years has meant that almost nothing from vernacular typology is getting constructed right now. We still have a few examples of houses built 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but they're also going to fast disappear. So it's a sad state for vernacular architecture right now in India.
Thank you. We could switch to maybe cities and context and public spaces, which is an important topic also in your work, a way to inhabit the world in a way. So your work is strongly connected to a context. You have a method based on research. You are researching the history, the culture, the specifics of a place, of a city. Can you talk to us through the different channels of this research?
Some research is happening where I live and the place that I'm very familiar with. But quite often I've also been invited to a new place to develop a project. And generally speaking, most institutions have a kind of a typology where they invite an artist for 2 or 3 months to come and research, fabricate, and exhibit in that stretch. But I found that a bit constricting because as soon as you reach, there is already the pressure to produce. So I try to go 2, 3, 4 times to the same place. First time, I try to go with a very blank slate, not thinking of what is going to be made, but trying to look at the place, look at the relationship between built environment and natural environment. And then there are a couple of subjects that I'm really interested in. Waste management of our society, because we just create so much waste. But also water is something that I have been researching in many different parts of the world. So the initial research is, and my research is not so much about numbers or statistics, it could even be anecdotal, it really meanders. And that research really helps me develop the seed of the idea for the project. And then going away from there is also, I think, a very important step, because that dissociation and distance allows for a different reading of what I saw when I was there. And then I plan out certain processes and then go back and try and make something.
Maybe let's talk about Brisbane, which is
an
example, sorry.
So this project, this is for the Asia Pacific Triennial in Brisbane. Again, I went to Brisbane, I think 4 or 5 times actually over a period of a year and a half. And initially, just looking at meeting a lot of architects, town planners, looking at city waste, municipal waste. But Brisbane, like many other cities in Australia and actually other places as well, was really fast changing at that time. So, for example, single-family house units were being combined into larger landholding to make large condominiums or commercial buildings. At the same time, when these single-family houses were broken down, they said they were converting that waste to energy, which is actually just burning it and using the heat, for heating something up. But I found that rather sad, because actually in Australia, initially the old houses, they're built from old growth timber, which is very well seasoned, and also it's a very rare resource now. We don't have enough old growth timber that we can use for construction. Most of it is protected. So I thought it was a really shame that all this timber was getting burned. And doing this research, I chanced upon a really massive yard of timber, where, well, the other aspect of it was that for structural integrity, most timber buildings were being dismantled and being replaced with cement and steel buildings, especially like wharfs and piers, old mills. So this one guy had been accumulating all this wood, and he actually loaned us the material for free, although it was really, really expensive. And in this project also, there were a lot of complications. One was some of those timber pieces were, 3-4 tons in weight, 13-meter long, really old. And actually, one of the workers who was working for me, he had trained under an old school carpenter in Australia. Although it was his job to just drill holes, but he knew a lot about the timber. So looking at the surface of the timber, he could say, okay, this one has been actually shaped with an axe, so with a manual axe. And that process was happening late 1800s, early 1900s, before circular saws, like large circular saws and hacksaws were developed. So I was tinkering around with the metal hardware which was embedded in the wood. And he also had trained under a blacksmith. So I wanted him to help me open some and make them free. But because it was his job to drill holes, he said, I have to talk to his boss. And his boss told me to talk to the supervisor. The supervisor asked me to talk to the design head. The design head asked me to talk to the curator. And that took about 1.5, 2 days. And then finally, when I convinced the curator, then that it trickled down. And then he was made available to me for half a day for that work. So in that sense, I was trying to tell you the systems that institutions create sometimes are just too, they don't have that flexibility. But I like to have that kind of a flow. Yeah, I kind of digress, but yeah.
No, it's okay. Is this freedom possible, more possible in biennale and triennale than inside institution? This collective work and this...
It depends, actually. It depends on the biennale and triennale. It depends on where it's located also. Like, I'll give you a very different example. I was working on Marrakesh Biennale, where I had decided to work with trash from a recycling market. And when I was bringing all that recycled material into the site was this Palais Badi, which is a very old kind of a classical wood and mud palace. So the manager, the president of the palace, she said, why are you getting so much trash? We have so much trash lying here. So I said, okay, show me your trash. So she took me to this yard, and they had all the old wood from the palace, which they had put into this yard, and they were going to sell it. So I told her to hang on to that. I sent my trash back, and I used just that wood for construction, So sometimes, but often, not only Biennale and Triennale, but institutions also, they expect a very definite project with a definite visualization to be able to assess feasibility, public liability, costing, so many things. While I like a very open-ended project where even I don't know what is going to be created. I'm trying to plan more processes, tools. So now I've been trying that to make proposals only in Excel sheets, very detailed Excel sheets, day-by-day account of what is going to happen, when, and what tools will be required, which people will be required, but no visualization. And that gives me so much freedom to actually create something. I think there's a huge problem in actually architectural design also right now. I think the 3D visualization of what will be built has become so important. And then, after the building is built, the photograph of the building has become more important than the human experience of the building. So I'm trying to stay away from the visualization if I can.
We can also talk maybe about the Palais de Tokyo Bordel Monstre, because you mentioned it, one part of your interest is about the waste, and it's a kind of lens to measure the implication of an institution or some group of people on the ecological matters and on sustainability. So, yeah, this project is kind of emblematic.
So I was in Paris for almost 6 months, and first 2-3 months, I didn't even think about what I was going to do. I knew that there was going to be an exhibition at the Palais. And somewhere down the middle, they were showing me different spaces for the Palais, in the Palais de Tokyo. And also because actually Jean de Loisy was the person who had recommended me for the residency. So I got access to a lot of things. And so finally the site that was chosen had never been used by the Palais before. But when I was looking at it, I kind of slipped into the back end, the service yard of the Palais. And there, they had a huge amount of trash from the previous exhibition. So generally, museums have this 3-month or 6-month cycle where exhibitions change. And then the previous exhibitions, not only just dry walls, but also artworks which people had made. And because Palais de Tokyo doesn't have a mandate to collect, so a lot of temporary artwork and temporary projects have happened there. And also because the volume is so big that people make things, but then afterwards they don't know what to do with it. So it all gets trashed. So they were going to spend some 10,000 euros to discard that material. So I just asked them to hang on to it for 6 months while my exhibition happens, and then they could discard it. So I basically used their trash. But then when I started using their trash, then they themselves started finding old trash in different parts of the building which they had no use for and giving it to me. So I got lots and lots and lots of stuff. But I also thought at that time that it's easy to look at institutional trash or other people's trash. But I wanted to also look at my trash. So I collected all the waste I created 6 months living in Paris, from food packaging to art brochures to whatever. And that was also a small part of this larger installation.
Yeah, and another example which we can relate to is the Chicago Biennale, where you also used industrial waste.
Yeah, in Chicago, also the curator was an old friend of mine, and I did visit Chicago almost a year before the Biennale happened. And he knew that I was really interested in researching waste, and he knew this really amazing guy who actually passed away 1 or 2 years back. His name was Ken Dunn. He was a philosophy student in the University of Chicago in the 1960s, where his professor was one of the first people looking at sustainable urbanism from the Western school of thought. And midway through his PhD, he said, Ken thought that there's no point writing about it, it's important to do something about it. So he abandoned his course, and at that time, Chicago was going through an amazing transformation where a lot of the industry was moving out, whether it was going to China or other places, because Chicago was a big industrial hub in the 30s, 40s, 50s. So all these factories were shutting down, and so Ken would go with his truck to different places that were shutting down and just take whatever they were throwing and go and warehouse it somewhere. And later, as he was collecting, he was also looking for people who might have use for this material, and he would give it to them for really cheap. So he was just trying to keep his organization floating somehow, but not really make money out of this trash. So in one of his warehouses, actually when we went to meet him, he was driving an excavator, a bulldozer, putting trash from one place to the other. And he was, I think, 82 or 83 when I met him, but still very, very energetic and excited about what he was doing. So in one of his warehouses, I found these black and red tubes, which when I asked him, he said there used to be a tube making factory in Chicago. And when they started putting the tube onto the spool, if there was a mistake, then they would have to stop, unspool the spool, and start all over again, because no spool could have any defect in it. So all these rubber pipes were the unspooled tubes, which were considered waste. And then the site that I discussed with the curators was actually a site of the opulence of industrial activity and extraction in Chicago. This was a building that was, it was made originally as the Chicago Library. It was very decorative with gold and marble and inlay work everywhere, which is kind of weird for a library, but I think it was basically rich people, rich families in Chicago trying to show off how much wealth they had made with industrial activity. And I thought these tubes were also kind of a byproduct of excess industrial activity, and I wanted to kind of juxtapose the two. So yeah, we made this 3-story tower in the main stairway, which is the kind of dominant architectural interior feature of this library, with these tubes. And funnily, we didn't realize that so much when we were collecting the tubes, but the tubes did have a distinct rubber smell, and then that smell spread all through the building. It was quite nice, I thought.
And what did it become after the show? The tubes?
Oh, we gave it back to Ken. Yeah, yeah.
So we're told that there's only 5 minutes left, so we can switch to maybe the last scale to inhabit the Earth. It's, of course, related to Bruno Latour's thinking. How do we manage the condition of habitability in our own planet? So how do we deal with the question of habitat, managing our own resources for the future years? One of your installation was a fiction. How can we imagine the archaeology of Earth in the not too far future?
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about this work?
Well, quite often, I mean, I didn't think about it initially because I have been looking at waste management in so many different places. But then when I started looking at archaeology, I thought, archaeologists are also looking at waste. They're looking at stuff that people leave behind to understand what the life of those people was, you know. So then I started also thinking about some archaeologist 2,000 years from now or 3,000 years from now, and what he will find of our generation or our times. So there could be like our generation could be like, say, the paper cup era, for example. You know, we have paper cups everywhere. So this project happened in university in Delhi, and they also had accumulated a lot of trash, like most institutions do actually, and they didn't know what to do with it. So it was an arduous process getting access to it because it was still somebody's property that had to be maintained. So I took electronic waste, which was piled up in this institution, put it in a tricycle, and buried it underground for about 5 or 6 months. And then with some archaeology students from the university, we dug it up as though it was a excavation, you know. So, yeah, trying to look at, just the amount of stuff our generation is going to leave behind, I think is unprecedented in our history so far. So.
Are you pessimistic?
No, I'm not pessimistic. I'm quite optimistic, but I'm skeptical.
So maybe we could finish with this work, which I found very moving, with this Jumna's protest, which is a personalization of the river Jumna, who is crying for help. Could you also tell the story of it?
I wanted funding for this project, but nobody was giving me any money. And basically they said, I will never get permission to do it. It's on the river in the middle of Delhi. And I said, I'm not looking for permission. I just want to do it. Because actually, funnily, the river doesn't belong to anybody. Even the police jurisdiction ends at the bank, not on the river. So I kind of funded this project myself, just looking at the river surface itself as a billboard. And also in India, the river is a personality, it's a goddess. So I did this whole propaganda of how the goddess has come back and is trying to talk to the city, because our river in Delhi is actually mostly sewage. There's not much clean water in it. And these are basically upturned 1-liter water bottles with a small LED and a battery inside it. So at night, it like really glows like a billboard.
Can you talk to us a little bit about also the people around it?
Yeah, actually, so the banks of the river also, because there's so much trash in the river, it's also a source of collecting recyclable material for the really downtrodden who have nothing. So they're just collecting waste from the river. They put it on the banks or on some island to dry, and once it's dry, they try to sell it. But I was actually scared that they're going to take my installation and sell it, because there is a metal frame below and all this plastic and stuff. So to preempt that, I hired them to take care of them, but take care of the installation at about €1 a day kind of thing. They would go with their boat. It was not a boat, it was like a sack full of thermocol, which was a boat, and go and clean it. And actually so much muck got stuck in this because the bottles acted like a filter. Once we even had a dead pig that we had to extract from it. But it created an interesting relationship between the people at the banks and what is happening on the river. And then later, because I had been doing film and documentary also, so I made some films on the community living over there.
Should we conclude, or do we still have a few minutes? We should conclude. Okay. So thank you so much, Asim Waqif. Thank you for explaining.